blinked.
Well, that had been a blink. So as a kid, you were having these rules in place about when we would, like, we had a computer and then we got a Super Nintendo, and then eventually I'm old enough and cell phones are a thing. So you're having these rules about what times we can use them, the amount of time we can use them for. And that
You guys loved those rules, by the way.
yeah, you were really popular. But that was why we did elective, is because I didn't have friends that had those rules. It was just like, you want to play Xbox.
Right.
Like the new Halo's out. Why would you regulate that?
Right.
But I can look back and see now that you weren't a totally bad guy. You must have loved me enough to want to do something, right? But there is the value of having the rule on either side of it. Is like, here's a time where you can play, and then here's a limit to that. It's like it allows a behavior to become ritualized rather than recreational, and that's where addictive patterns form. Is when you just
I would add ritualized rather than recreational is a good way to say it, but I would also say rather than immersive.
Mm-hmm.
In other words,
all consuming.
Yeah, part of the point of that was to say, this is something you do. This is not who you are.
Mm-hmm.
There is a world you live in, and this is a fun activity you can dip into, but then you dip out and you re-enter normal.
Yeah, like a friend of ours was saying the other day, when he would go out and play with his friends, and they'd ride bikes and they'd do whatever activity they were doing, and they're playing basketball. But then if they had Atari, and they're like, oh, I guess we could do that too, and they play it for a bit. But it wasn't like, well, it's summer and we've got all day, so let's sit down and play Atari all day.
Right.
That was one of the many activities that they were doing, most of them taking place outside.
Yeah. I grew up in, and part of the last generation to grow up in, probably the last. The idea was, number one, the world was a safer place. It's always been dangerous, but human trafficking and so many terrible things. I get the dilemma that parents face now in terms of needing to protect their kids in ways that parents could afford to just send them outside. We rode bikes without helmets. We rode in cars without, safety belts.
Savages.
I mean, my safety belt was my mom throwing my arm across me, But we would go and play and wander out in the country, ride bikes, whatever it was, for hours and hours and hours. And maybe your buddy had an Atari 1600, and maybe not. Maybe another one had an Odyssey, Atari 1600, or Intellivision. Those were the three.
Oh, don't date yourself.
Yeah, those were the three. Nintendo didn't even exist for me until college. And then these are just basically blinking dots. Like, I remember when Dad came home with Pong, and you hook it up and it's two paddles and a ball, and that was
we can move it.
Yeah, that was transcendent. But it also had its natural limits, because it didn't have the ability to mimic reality. It was obviously an artificial construct.
Yeah, it was
that was
8-bit.
Cutting edge at the time, but so simple and primitive, you could only play it for so long before you got bored with it. But that's not. See, I guess part of what we're doing here is we can't actually have a meaningful AI conversation without just kind of looking at the genesis of technology and its increasingly dominant, domineering, pervasive, unavoidable influence in a way that now things that were once optional and occasional are pervasive and all-consuming. Technology is second nature. Gen Z is fully digitized. Their kids will never know that a telephone once had a cord plugged in. You guys knew that, even you guys, but that quickly transitioned. We haven't had a landline with a telephone cord with a telephone with a telephone cord for years and years. So you as a millennial, me Gen X, you millennial, even Gen Z, we've got enough kids, 8 kids. I have both millennial and Gen Z kids.
Look at
But
you.
yeah, but so I can remember when life was mostly like it had been prior.
Mm.
And as a transition to, you were the first, what do they say? Millennials were the first technology generation. I don't remember the phrase.
Yeah, but like where that was really a part of our daily life in a way that wasn't weird or foreign. It was
Right,
just like, yeah, we have the internet.
right. Yeah, but it was kind of standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
You just grow up with that paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a while to figure out what Facebook was. I
Uh-huh.
couldn't, I had to wrap my
Yeah, it wasn't
mind around.
intuitive to you.
Right.
Yeah.
And to some degree it still isn't. And so the idea that in just a couple of decades humanity's paradigm of existence
Mm-hmm.
has shifted so dramatically is kind of the necessary platform we have to explore before we can really talk about why AI is an issue.
Yeah, because the deeper root of the problem is the apparatus itself. Computer technology is what Atari was doing was utilizing those transistors and electrical components with the necessary RAM to generate that user experience. So now we've upgraded our RAM, we've upgraded our controller, we've upgraded our TVs, but it's the same like constituent elements that allow for that experience, but now it's instead of having like 2 kilobytes of RAM that do the 2 lines, it has 20 gigs of RAM just to run the game, which like one of the popular companies is called Unreal Engine.
Uh-huh.
I just love that name because it's
Uh-huh.
so apt.
Uh-huh.
And it's this world where you can play in a game and you can walk, and it's not doing the thing where like you walk and then suddenly the mountain pops up and that thing pops
Right.
up. It's doing that so fast behind the scenes that you're going through a world that feels functionally infinite like it would when I go outside and walk. And I'm
Right.
not like, what will pop up magically in front of me? I know that by the time I get there, I'm going to see it.
Right.
So we have these games that are capable of doing that in a lifelike speed, although it's cartoonish. But you can accept
But increasingly less so.
yeah, and you're still willing to accept that in a way that is almost more gratifying than real life because you know how to engage with it. It just has that relative flatness that gives you the sense of I see what I'm looking at.
Right.
There's not a deeper thing hidden within it. I know how to manipulate it and control it, and I accept it, and it's colorful, so it's fun to look at. It almost is hyper real to our detriment in terms of our ability to remain rooted in reality. You can play Pong and you're not just like, you know
Right.
what I mean? It's like this how big was the screen that you're playing on? And it's just doing this. And so if I'm guessing if mom called to you from the kitchen, you weren't gonna be like completely oblivious to her and just like a mindless drone doing this. You'd be
Right.
like, well, no, I want to play, but
Yeah.
you're aware of what you're doing.
Right.
Where I can become so transfixed playing a video game now that like I won't hear you calling me and I've got headphones on and I'm just like totally
You're talking to
sucked
somebody
in.
else in another country through
Yeah.
your headphones who's
Yeah.
also playing the same game. You're functionally in another world
Yeah.
together on opposite sides of the planet.
Yeah, which is still the evolution of that apparatus and just the ability to control a digital environment. But now it's become so it's like ballooned to the size of I can put my whole consciousness into it and I can use my body to interact with it in a way like when you're using your hands, those are like symbolic analogs of your mental faculties.
Yeah.
So I'm literally manipulating this magical world and it's in my ears so it feels 360 and the screen is so big that I lose track of what my body is doing. Like the house could be on fire if the volume's loud enough. I'm not gonna notice it until the flame is licking me in the leg.
Right.
And then I'm gonna be like, I just got bit or something.
Right.
But like, I'm almost there. I'm almost
Right.
there.
Well, I want to come back to, I want to stay on this vein of thought, but folded into the particular, I think, and unique danger of that to boys as opposed to girls.
Uh-huh.
The unique temptation of that,
Mm-hmm.
but also
That's important.
the Genesis 1. I just as you were talking, I was realizing the the issue with so many things is they aren't fundamentally evil, but they tap on our natural design and co-opt it, maybe with malice, but maybe not, just the fallen humans living in a fallen world, we can make our own messes. We don't always have to have a nefarious outside purpose. But that dynamic is, you were just talking about, I get to control this world.
Yeah.
Well, that's Genesis 1, 26, that God said, be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over and
subdue the earth.
Right, subdue. And so
I'm doing that right now.
Right. So now, as a young man, I don't have a lot of means. I'm 9 years old, I'm 13 years old, I'm 15 years old. I'm not yet at that stage of life where I'm subduing much at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I have artificially been given worlds to conquer.
Yes, absolutely.
And power to conquer it.
I can kill people.
Yeah.
I can kill 50 people in a game.
Right, and I get a badge for it.
Oh yeah, and I get respect from all the people that I hear them cussing at me online. I'm like, I'm capable of all of this.
I'm gaining stature,
Yeah.
I'm gaining significance. These are all God-given human design elements.
Yeah.
Have authority, subdue, be a force for change and good. But there's a perverseness to how it is being doled out. It's being distributed in digital chips in a false world that now I get to prematurely exert that kind of authority without any maturity or wisdom, just pure power and bullets.
Right, but you also increasingly identify yourself with that digital avatar of yourself. So like when I was a kid, I would go outside and play with sticks and like cut a little tree down and be like, that made me feel powerful.
Right.
But you could still do that today. It's just kids don't want to do that. This is way more fun. Like I'm outside and playing, I'm hitting the stick and I'm using my imagination. This is like, I'm literally killing people and I'm using weapons and I'm exploring in a world and I have a sword in my hand and I'm like, it's very complicated. And then
I have prestige and reputation and wealth.
Yeah, and in the heat of the moment, like especially these multiplayer games where they're first person shooter, it's like the point is to put you in the experience of a war veteran that gets PTSD from what they're doing. But you're like, ha, 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 ha. It's just like maniacal, like, yes, I got you. It generates this massive natural response of like, I just subdued the earth.
Accomplishment,
and people saw me do it.
Right.
Yeah, like I'm a warrior.
Right.
I'm on an adventure.
I mean, there's a movie coming out, Gran Turismo, I don't even know the story. Are you familiar with the movie?
No.
Well, it's apparently based on true life events with a guy that was so good at the video game. I don't remember.
It generalized into real life.
A Formula One race car guy that was so good at it, he actually became a pro because he had the digital experience he was a master of the digital experience and he actually excelled in the real. Mm-hmm. Well, we know that's a 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million, 1 in 100 million. But you have a whole generation of boys that think, I am a badass that could conquer the world and win a war. I've got my gear. I know tactics. I know strategy. I know this and that. And they built an illusion of accomplishment around something that once the system turns off, they aren't that person at all.
Right. That's where it's addictive. It's the same thing as being high on cocaine and thinking, this is who I am. Like I am capable of all of this energy and it's not what I want to say. But then as the high comes down and you're like, I like that. I want to be that guy again. So I know how to be that guy. I need to engage with that substance and I need that to become a part of me. And so that's what you do when you play the video game is you're like, that's where I get to feel this way and be that person.
All the dopamine cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about that for a minute
it is dopaminergically facilitated because what the dopaminergic system is doing physiologically is it's orienting
Wait. What's dopamine? It's a neurotransmitter.
I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it because I think it's most helpful to think of what is dopamine doing within the system. Okay. So without getting too technical, which honestly I might not be able to get too technical anyways, but dopamine is going to orient you in goal-directed behavior.
It's the reward drug.
Not
of the body.
Yeah, but not exactly. It's not necessarily rewarding behavior. It's rewarding you in pursuit of a goal. but it's not the same thing as achieving the goal.
Okay.
That is not as rewarding as the pursuit of the goal,
Okay.
which is what's fascinating. When we are oriented properly and we're moving into the future, it's like, I know I've got to walk 2 miles through the woods and I've got to get to this cabin and it's raining outside.
So the dopamine hit isn't once you arrive and walk in the door.
Right.
The dopamine hit is the steps along the way toward that.
Right. And the mile markers, so to speak, of how I gauge my
Progress.
how I gauge my progress.
So I got to cross the river. Okay, boom, dopamine hit. I only have this much more to go. I got to get over that hill. Boom, another dopamine hit.
Yes, yeah, and it's a different system that's engaged when the goal is accomplished, but it's more of like a balancing. Okay, now we can come down because we're here, but that's why it's not as rewarding. The chase, the thrill of the hunt, that's what's rewarding.
And so the dopamine, the challenge of the dopamine cycle is in a repetitive environment where the goal isn't fundamentally changing. The environment is repetitive. You have to escalate the terms of the environment to keep achieving the same hit. In other words, that's the lure of pornography. Pornography triggers a dopamine cycle, but it tends to get more and more debased and violent and degraded because the same level of pornography isn't giving that jolt to the system that rewards the activity.
Right, and for other reasons, that's also why by the time the pornographic ritual is completed, there's not the feeling of elation. It's like, oh, that feeling passed, and now here I am.
Right.
Because you did it, you got to the goal, and now you realize what the goal was.
There's a letdown.
Yeah, the letdown, with the necessary letdown. So when you are online and you're in these environments that you can just like new game, keep going. That is,
or new kill, new weapon.
yes, all of those things are they're increasing that pattern. The rut deepens, so to speak, where you can develop the tolerance to literally play for hours without end.
Because you're actually bored at the same level that once excited you. So you're playing for hours and hours looking for that ephemeral, transcendent next moment where you get that one weapon that others don't have, but it's such a high level and a hard thing to achieve. So you're bored now where you once were thrilled until you get that, and now you're bored again.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, there's just the knowledge that now I'm here in the environment where this is possible. So if I am addicted to alcohol, why would I want to be somewhere where I don't have access to alcohol?
Right.
I'm going to be where alcohol is. I'm going to find a way to have that in my environment, or to make the environment around me facilitate that need that I have. So why would I not be online? So my friends are online. That's where excitement is. That's where opportunity and adventure is. That's where my identity is. That, as a young man, that's where my masculine identity is.
Right.
So why would I not be online? That's the social arena. That's where the competition is taking place.
Yeah, because now that young man, 13 years old, who has this reputation, status, credibility, he might openly brag about being 13 and how he's trashing and dogging on these 30-year-olds because that gives him extra status. Or he may have an avatar that projects himself as a 28-year-old man because he doesn't want to be 13 to them. Whatever it is, it's an artificial construct that has assured him he has meaning, significance, power, wealth, skills that he hasn't yet actually produced in the real world. So now at some point he actually does have to re-enter the real world. And there's a girl he kind of likes or has interest in, but he has no social ability, no social skills that have developed because he's in this endless dopamine cycle in the virtual world. And he's actually as courageous and heroic as he is there. He's a cowardly lion here. And so he sees that girl and he drops his eyes. A buddy tries to talk to him in real life and he fumbles over his words.
Oh yeah, terrified socially.
A teacher asks him a question and he gets it wrong and the other kids laugh. And all of a sudden he's not the hero. And he doesn't like that feeling, so where does he go to be the hero again?
Right, and the term for that is, psychologically, is negative reinforcement.
Right.
That's when you get in exactly the example you gave. It the positive reinforcement is coming from the game itself. I go into the real world. I'm terrified by a girl. She's kind of pretty, and we're just schoolmates, but I'm still terrified. Negative reinforcement. I'm going back home to comfort myself. And then when I become increasingly terrified by increasingly less important females around me, because that's what that pattern is doing too. So it's almost like this you're getting hit coming and going,
Uh-huh.
and it's driving you toward that addictive pattern of behavior. And but then you have friends there, and so this is why addictive patterns of behavior are so difficult to break, because like a very famous and often cited study of of two groups of genetically identical rats, where one group is isolated and they're given the regular water and the water laced with cocaine, and then another group is socialized and they have things to play
Wait,
on.
say the two groups again.
Two groups of genetically identical rats. One group, they're all isolated from each other, and so they're just in their individual cages. And one is there's two options for water. One is normal water. One is cocaine water.
In that same group.
Yeah, isolated rats in group A, let's call it,
Uh-huh.
water or cocaine water.
Uh-huh.
Those are the options available to them.
Okay.
They get addicted to the cocaine water. They're alone, and they're excited by that.
Okay.
The other group, group B, let's call it, is rats that are socialized, playing with each other so they can wrestle. They've got toys, they've got that, and they're offered water and cocaine water. They taste both of them. The point is they're going to taste both sources,
Right.
but the rats that are socialized don't choose the cocaine water. They choose the normal water. The rats that are isolated choose the cocaine water and
Wow.
become exclusive to it.
Wow.
So the role of and there's a more modern awareness of like, this is why we should destigmatize addiction, because it really is a social epic phenomenon.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be criticizing the individual. We should be helping entice them out of that social environment and providing an alternative social structure for them. But the problem is
Healthy community changes a lot.
yes, and prevents
Right.
the opportunity for that addictive spirit to manifest itself within the individual.
Which is, I mean, again, Genesis, it's not good for man to be alone.
yeah.
The community is as simple as two.
Yeah.
But that changes the dynamic entirely and helps modulate the impulse, the God-given impulse to rule and take authority and have dominion in healthy ways that are for the good of the community rather than toxic ways.
Right. So then imagine that it's the analogy of we're isolated rats, but now they can like link up with each other and they're all on cocaine, but they're all isolated. And now it's like, well, we have community. So like problem solved. And I'm drinking the cocaine water, but now I have social companions in this environment. So that's the solution. I just think that that's somehow
We're all addicted
analogous.
together, so none of us know we're addicted.
Right. And at least yeah, we're like brothers in arms in that way. It's like we're in the
Right.
trenches together. We're online together. We're doing this thing together. So if my mom comes and pulls the cord out and it's like, you've been playing this for too long, go do some chores. I'm thinking, you're actually taking me out of the meaningful world.
Right.
You're bringing me into this base and degrading thing of responsibility. I'm with my friends right now, doing what they're doing right now.
Right.
So that's like getting picked up early from the party and like, you got to come home for bedtime. It's like, but this is what all my friends are doing.
Right.
There's that illusion of social interaction that is actually allowing the addictive pattern to be present. I'm going out drinking with my friends. They're having 20 beers.
Right.
So I'm just hanging with my buzz. We're having 20 beers. Like,
Right.
it's so weird they're all doing it.
Right.
It's so weird I'm online 8 hours a day, staying
Right.
up at night. That's not unnatural. That's what my friends are doing. And they live in another part of the world. So this is how we get to spend time together.
So now the issue is the relatively rapid change viewed over a historical lens. I mean, for up until the Industrial Revolution, only a couple hundred years ago, the Earth was mostly the same. It was more the same than it was different. I mean, you can go the Egyptian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the ancient Chinese dynasties, the Mongolian. You go back as far as you want, and different varying degrees of primitive life with certain kinds of sophistication. There was wheels and carts, and there was still commerce, and there were homes and fire and all of that. But until you start to reach the Enlightenment, the You start to come out of the dark ages, and
Until we start to prioritize science.
and therefore there's a focus on technology
Mm-hmm.
and the advances of technology, and the Industrial Revolution begins to proliferate these things. So in the last 200 years, the human civilization has been capable of far different things than the previous 5,500 years, 6,000 years, 10, whatever the measurement you want to give. And then in the last 20 or 30 years, 50 years, the earth has been very different than the last 200. And then in the last 5 or 10, the earth has been very different than the last 50. So there's been a great acceleration, a dramatic acceleration that has completely redefined what is normal. And the normalization of increasingly sophisticated technologies with the ability to redefine normal is now normal. So we're groping for what normal is, because none of us, including me, have lived in what the earth considered normal for thousands and thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
We're all in a relatively artificial construct by historic standards.
Yeah.
But it's getting more and more artificial, and that artificiality is becoming more and more normal.
Yeah, and I think that's only the case because we leaned so heavily into this atheistic scientism that we call the Enlightenment. Go figure that we call it that.
Right.
And so suddenly these centuries old ideas and time honored traditions of giving the land a time to rest, even from crops that we literally need to survive, but that allows the land to be producing bountifully and with like nutrient dense products, but the animals have to rest for that to be the case, the land has to rest for that to be the case, the people have to rest for that to be a case. Now we have this pursuit which is just purely technological, purely
Right.
how far can we go, how fast can we get there, and it's monetized and it's incentivized by the government. So we become deracinated from religious tradition and we lean into what I call atheistic scientism, but I think that's otherwise just been called paganism.
Yeah.
Nebo was the god of science,
Yeah.
and intellectualism, even in the times of Israel and the Canaanites. So here we are with this technology that it's almost like we're trying to find ways to legislate, like we're so far past the line, and but we're talking about this right here. Like, well, what do we do in this area? But this is where we reached a problem. And unless we're actually willing to acknowledge that that's the line of demarcation, we're just going to have all of these hot air blowing conversations about things that are so far past. Like, how much time should our kid be allowed to watch? How much is 8 hours too much for video games a day? Or like maybe 4 is a healthier balance. And it's like every day,
Right.
video games?
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
It's not the 8 to 4 hour conversation. It's like, is this kid doing push-ups?
Right.
Is this
Does
kid...
he know what a tree is?
Yeah, does he have a job?
Yeah.
Oh, he's 23. He lives with his mom. He doesn't have a job.
Right.
I know a kid who's 16 wearing diapers to play video games.
Yeah, talk about that.
So
Wait,
that's kind of all I want to say about it is there's a kid who's 16 years old.
This is probably not uncommon.
Oh yeah, this is far more common than we would want to admit.
Yeah.
He's in his basement. He's playing video games. He's wearing diapers.
Why?
Because his parents are letting him.
Yeah. I mean, that's the answer. But for him, it is because he doesn't want to have to exit.
That's the addiction. I mean, people do the same thing gambling.
He's wearing diapers because he doesn't want a 30-second interruption in his video game. He might lose a position in the battle. He might...
Or that's just a level of addiction. Like, you find all of these ways to justify it. So I'm sitting down a slot machine. Well, if I leave and it hits for somebody else,
right.
So if I just stay in my diaper, that gives me more coins per minute, which gives me more pulls per hour, which gives me more chances to hit.
Right.
You find all the ways to justify it, but it ends up with you sitting there in a diaper like a baby.
So a 16-year-old is wearing a diaper, and we can easily look at and see the problem of that. This is a problem.
Yeah.
We would call that a psychosis of some sort, or...
Except, but what would his mother call it?
Exactly. So now we have to say, is he going to the store and buying those diapers for himself? No.
Highly unlikely.
His mom or his dad is facilitating
Yeah,
this.
absolutely.
And why would a parent facilitate this? I refuse to believe that the mom actually thinks that's a good idea.
No, but she is willing to corroborate his narrative that that's the life that he should be living. So that might be an Oedipal situation, or it could even be.
Well, yeah, okay, but before you get too deep into that, I just want to address uh, the the chances are he has had a very. She didn't start buying him diapers, but when she pushed
Like the
against
behavior
it,
grew. Mhm.
when she pushed against it, his reaction was so intense and so negative that she probably increasingly yielded to the point that, okay, a diaper, fine.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's in
Yeah,
stages though.
yeah, that's probably what happened.
And his emotion is so strong, and her will wasn't stronger than his emotion.
And for all of those, like you boil the frog slowly, right? It's like you
Right.
just slowly turn up the heat, turn up the heat.
And so this is normalization on multiple levels.
Yeah.
It's normalization for parents looking at and saying, I don't know what to do. It's normalization for kids saying,
Yeah.
this is all I want.
Yeah.
Don't take this from me.
Mhm.
It's normalization for society that keeps pumping out games that earn more than Hollywood earns
Yeah.
as movies.
Yeah.
And now this is reality.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look at a movie like The Matrix, where humans are serving, in that scenario, they were batteries for this AI generated world. But the point is that these systems aren't serving humans. Humans are serving the systems.
Right. Yeah, that's the point.
And so that kid in diapers doesn't have the ability to have a rational conversation about this. You can't say, hey, let's talk about this. Why? Because he's already in the pod, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it would require some, like, just painstakingly slow process of like changing his. Okay, you're playing for 9 hours a day. What if we do 8 hours and 50 minutes a day?
Right.
And you just throttle it back that slowly, or it's what they call intervention,
Yeah,
which is like
cold turkey.
Yeah, we're just drawing a hard line because you've gone way too far. We don't know how to bring you back.
Right. And my point is, the throttling back that could take forever.
Yes.
He's going to be 21 in diapers.
Oh yeah.
The cold turkey approach, but it's going to require some parents with a different level of conviction. Like right now, the only reason I think that mother or father is allowing, that mom might be working 3 jobs, it might be a single mother.
Oh, God only knows. I don't know her story.
Yeah, there's no judgment in that sense. She may be doing the best she can, but there has to be a different level of perspective, a different narrative. This is part of our conviction. There has to be a superior narrative brought to bear that equips decision makers, in this case, the parents, to have a conviction and a will stronger than the emotional reaction of the child.
Well, let me go with it this way. I think that kid needs to be open to the call of adventure. He needs to be looking for the spirit rather than satisfied with the substance that gives that illusion of adventure.
Yeah.
And so but like we were talking about, all of his dopaminergic process that has become so validated by that video game is the reason he's willing to sit in a diaper, because that is a part of his search.
Right.
That's his armor now that he puts on to engage in that quest.
Wow.
But what happens is, in the Matrix, it's Morpheus is the figure that offers him the choice.
Right.
But Morpheus it's the part of the symbolism of that name is the figure of transformation.
Right.
Offers to you can wake up.
Right.
But then you can't go back.
Right.
And so the new man is willing to say,
Neo.
Yeah, I will follow the spirit of transformation and let it transform me.
Right.
So if that kid feels the call of God on him to wake up, then I think that's very, very similar to what happened to Abraham. He's old in his ways. He's living in his father's tent. His father's passed on, but he still is living in his father's tent. So that's almost like, I'm content to just be where I am. I don't need to go.
Right.
But then when God comes,
the comfort
to him,
of routine, the comfort of the
Yes.
familiar, all of that,
Yes.
which we're all drawn to. We want that.
Yes. But so when God reveals himself to him, there's how many 20 some years that pass before that promise is fulfilled, long enough for his
Yeah.
wife to be laughing at it by the time the Lord revisits him.
Right.
So that's Abraham's capacity for delayed gratification
Right.
and willingness to have faith within that. And
Right.
we don't see the capacity for delayed gratification in our young men nowadays.
Abraham was 75 when he was called out, and at 99 he was told he would have a child.
Okay, that's what I had in my head.
Yeah.
Sure. So the capacity for delayed gratification is integrally unified with the concept of faith and righteousness.
Yeah.
The willingness to hold fast in faith with the promise of the future, regardless of our anxiety and our preferred timeline. But I know this is surreal, but what if Abraham's in his tent playing video games,
Right.
and God gives him the call? Maybe he would not even hear it.
Right.
Or maybe he'd be like, oh.
Yeah. Right.
So what if we're so distracted that we're no longer open to the call of adventure?
Right.
Because it would be calling us to live in the real world with the necessity for delayed gratification.
Yeah.
The requirement to adopt responsibility oriented toward the future. I don't want to look that way. This is freaking awesome.
Right.
Here I am. I'm in the adventure right now.
The ongoing immediate reward and the immersiveness of it and the addictive tendency of it. What you're describing is its ability to dull our other faculties and sensitivities and awareness so that God could shout in a thunderstorm or whisper in the cave, and we're going to be equally dull to both.
And that's what I think we were talking about earlier about what might be inherently problematic about the digital ether, this hyper real feeling world, which is actually untethered to reality except by the technology that supports it.
Yeah.
I think that almost becomes this space that evolved from like big tech, as we call it, all of these companies that are just bottom line oriented, that are just pushing a product. They want to make money. They want user engagement. They want to aggregate all of that data to further their models that make the products better, that make it more desirable for the end user, that make the end user more susceptible to future products, that enhance those products. And we create this artificial construction that is so far outside. Like I become so engrossed in the metaverse, let's say. Right. I'm wearing the headset and I've got the spatial surround and I'm at a party and I'm wearing this thing and there's other. I become so involved in that world, but that world is not the world.
Right.
I'm no longer in the world. I'm in a completely illusory, ethereal realm that is only allowed to be there with the infrastructure of big tech.
Yeah. So it seems ridiculous on the one hand to say something like this.
To describe it abstractly, it does sound very like, well, that's not really what you're doing.
No. But I'm appreciating what you're saying. Apple's new, I can't think of what it's called.
Oh yeah, but the headset,
by far it is cool. That's the thing.
Yeah,
that it's the biggest advance, the most natural kind of simulation of artificial possibilities, and in that we are. You can imagine a future party of teenagers where this device doesn't cost $3,000, it costs $500. They've all asked for it for their birthday. They go to a party and everyone's in the same room with their goggles on. And they're all together in the room in another room because they can't actually produce the room they want to be in. So they aren't looking at each other. They aren't talking to each other. They're in an artificial construct in the same room. And you say, well, that's nuts. That's crazy. They wouldn't do that. Go to that room now with 10 teenagers and they're all doing this on their phones.
All I would say is in the future, they're not going to be in the same room. They'll be in their bed, but then they go to the same room.
Right. Why mess with going there? Because we aren't going to be there.
Yeah, I don't need people to see me. I want them to see the projection of me.
Right.
So we live in that world of projection, which is only capable because our imaginations are willing to populate it. But in the real world, I'm sitting here like just decaying.
Right.
But in my head, I'm just alive.
Right.
And that ties into this really interesting problem that AI developers have, which is it's difficult to develop anything resembling consciousness without giving it some embodiment. Consciousness has to be embodied, and that has to do with the fact that I can't remember the scientist's name, but I heard Peterson reference him, so I'm taking his word on it. That this researcher said in his own words that every act of human perception, like physiologically, when I'm looking at you with my ocular system, every flicker of that happens, the tens of thousands of seconds that are subdivided by every micro perception is a micro narrative. The way that that's integrated at a level that I don't even know how to articulate, what these researchers are saying is that is the body identifying a narrative and then interpreting that in the physiology, how to engage with it. So like a easy example is I don't see this, and then like at the level of flash freezing my thoughts, my perceptions, I don't see this and think there is a red cup and it has water in it, and now I want to take a drink out of it. It's like what I see is the thing I can drink out of. And then I identify the cup and the redness and the water within it. But I first identify how it's something that I can engage with. So when we are developing consciousness without an embodiment, we're trying to create a story seer without itself having a story.
Okay, this is fascinating, but you need to
Where am I going with it?
No. Re-explain the difference in the perception of the cup.
Oh, okay. So I could first say that this is a cup with a handle and water, and I'm thirsty, and so now I'm gonna choose to lift it and take a drink out of it. But that is like kind of the flat chronological way that we would rationally
If we had to
think
write
about
out
it.
the process, that's how we would describe it.
Yeah, but and that's what you're kind of inclined to say when you want to think when you want to think about things scientifically, and you're like, well, what's really going on? It's
Right.
really like all of these just flat unidimensional acts of perception that I do. Like that's what's really happening. There's no spirit that is between me and the cup. It's just me looking. But what's happening when you're looking, according
A
to
sequence
this,
of mechanical actions that produce a behavior.
right, it's mechanistic, it's atomistic,
Yeah.
it's just there's it's very flat. But according to this researcher, you don't actually perceive like a lifeless inanimate object. You perceive a narrative that you can. So I perceive me drinking from it before I perceive the cup and the form and the color and the shape.
So there's actually meaning embedded in the
Right.
thought rather than the atomistic.
There's meaning embedded in the act of perception.
Right.
I perceive meaning.
Which requires incarnation, is your point.
Yes, I perceive meaning and I discriminate as a result of my perception. So it's inherent to us that we are incessantly discriminating and judging between narratives.
Right.
And what allows us to orient ourselves in the abstract is a guiding narrative that dictates our ethical behavior. And then that's how I discriminate between the narratives that I perceive at a conscious level. But even so deep down in my physiology, I can't even articulate it. That's how my eyeballs are discriminating their narratives that they perceive thousands of times a second.
Right.
Your eyeballs, you're constantly flickering around, and I'm perceiving things in their relationship to me, how I'm engaging with them. That's what the world is to me. And that's why we get horrified by things we don't understand. And we see it in a movie, some monstrous thing, and it's lurking in the shadow. And my mind is just racing. What is that thing, and what is it doing to me? And how am I going to engage with it?
And we want to jump ahead in the narrative to the point where we finally know.
Yes.
That's why people skip to the end of the book to read.
Yes.
Because we can't stand the pressure of not knowing within the narrative.
Yes, yes. And so I'm trying to tie that into this phenomenon of existing in the digital world. We're willing to we're capable of perceiving narratives in a totally artificial construct, but the danger of that is, let's just say, for the sake of throwing a number out there, I'm spending 80% of my time in the metaverse goggles on. So I become the type of person that is convinced that there is a narrative structure to that environment, when in the real world That is a lifeless, breathless technology. I can unplug and it all goes away. But now I'm rooted into that reality, like quote unquote reality. So what happens to people that they work there, they go to the bank there? This is what these companies want you to do.
Right.
Work, party, bank,
your entire life,
own real estate. Yeah, there's your life. But now what I'm thinking is, how is the spirit of adventure in that reality?
Right.
I don't think it is. I think it's all artificially
how is the
constructed.
Spirit, period.
Right. Is there even spirit there? Because it's all just a projection of our ability to create, to discern a narrative engagement. Like
in any other, you're saying in any other way, we would objectively look at that box sitting there as a non-entity that doesn't have its own story.
Right.
But that box has the ability to put us in a story that is so complete that we feel like the box itself is where we want to be.
Right. And I think that's a deep perversion of a religious text.
Right.
Because I can open this up and see a story that helps me understand the world. Or I can go to the metaverse and I engage in a hyper real world that deracinates me from the real world and does not help me engage with the real world.
And that's actually where we started months ago, before we got to the AI conversation, which I think is valuable. If this is episode 1, it's why it's valuable in this conversation we want to have over many, many conversations, because it's not enough to talk about the challenges, the problems, the threats, the possibilities of AI. If we don't have a sense of our own history and the trajectory of technology. You made the point, and it arrested me months ago, that once upon a time, we started this conversation. Once upon a time, as a kid, I was a kid. And then for a few minutes in the day, Pong was interesting. But then it wasn't interesting, and the real world was more interesting. And so I had a real life with an occasional primitive technology experience. That has come along so quickly, yet slowly enough, like the frog in the pot, that we don't realize how everything has been redefined in just 20, 30 years. Atari is so primitive, it might as well be, the invention of the stone, of a stone wheel.
It's like the Flintstones
Right,
toy.
right. And things are so advanced, so amazing, that now the average child, the unrestrained average child, who doesn't actually have the ability to resist these temptations by themselves. There's too much social pressure, too much opportunity, too much desire to experiment with that. We could call it the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's something beyond their ability to understand the repercussions of.
It's a poisonous, addictive substance.
Yes, and we have to be willing to say, don't do that, or to severely moderate it in a way that it never becomes who they are. But right now, we have people that are not experiencing the real world and occasionally touching the digital world. Their digital world is their world, and occasionally they exit it to be in the real world.
Yeah, there's got to be a difference between, my brothers and I group texted and we're going to get online at this time because we all have an hour, give or take, and then but it gives us a chance to chat and to play a game together. And that's got to be different than we're all already online separately and then we just meet up and now we're playing online.
Right, because we've already been online for 5 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So it's we're already at the bar and then we just got a table together. But that's different than being let's spend time together. Where should we do it? Well, let's go to the bar and grab a drink. Okay, we'll do that. And then the point is us socially in the real world. Whereas in the other example, it's we all wanted to get drunk separately, but now we're just there together.
Right. And so 5 hours later, they finally meet up, and then they play for 5 hours, and then they're like, okay, see you tomorrow.
Yeah, because I know you'll be here.
Right.
Because that's what we do now.
Right.
So it prevents us from being in the real world. It prevents us from adopting responsibility. It prevents us from actually taking care of ourselves if we are the temple.
Just as in the analog, if you spend all your time at the bar getting drunk, you aren't in the real world there either.
Right.
This is
You're escaping.
This is an even more dangerous, because it doesn't immediately present itself as a problem.
Well, yeah, but the escapism motif of addiction, I think we can tie that into idolatry, because the idea is escaping responsibility and appealing to something that will solve that problem for you.
For sure.
So in the time when we're all farmers, or we're all, it's when it's agrarian society, an idol comes along that is elevated to status uniformly by the people, that says, if we appeal to this, then our crops will flourish. And I'm concerned about that. But rather than me thinking that's my responsibility, and like, I think there's just a difference between, like, I'm praying for the right thing to happen, but I'm also doing everything within my power to ensure that it's going to happen, and being like, oh, thank goodness, I just appealed to the idol of fertility, and so now I can trust that there's going to be a fertile land, and
Right.
then I'm like operating underneath that.
Right.
There's righteous faith, which is aptly believe, it's like you believe in that which you have not seen. And then I think there's idolatrous faith, which is like, if I go through the right motions, that process is guaranteed to happen. And it seems to me, when Jesus critiques Thomas for believing in him because he saw the scars, what he says in the Greek is, Thomas, have you believed? Blessed are they not seeing who believe.
Mm.
So it's almost like he's challenging Thomas. Do you actually believe because you've gotten the chance to see? You will be blessed because you believe, if you have not seen but are engaging in that process.
Mm.
That's how I interpret it. And
Mhm.
I think the way that that applies to all of the things that we're talking about is, if I only believe what I see, I'm actually tricking myself into thinking I'm believing something. And I think that's the point of saying, it's not just merely sacrifices and offerings I want from you, Israel. It's your heart.
Mm.
Even Moses saying in Deuteronomy, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart.
Right.
Be stubborn no longer.
Right.
And that verse we were talking about in 1 Samuel, where it's saying stubbornness is akin to
Rebellion, stubbornness,
divination, and idolatry.
Right.
Those sins are akin, because of the way that it's being juxtaposed, as saying, if you're not pursuing God, there is some attitude deep within you that is leading you astray, which may as well be idolatry, or it may as well be divination, or what have you. The point is, you're becoming manipulated by that spirit within you that wants to draw you away from righteous faith in God. Isn't that how it's put to Cain? Sin is lurking at the door.
Right.
But your purpose is to master it.
Right.
So that's how I think we have responsibility over not just a war within ourselves, but subduing the earth and maintaining our environment, stewarding it. I think we're losing the opportunity. Losing the opportunity to do that when we are so focused on the mini game of how much XP I can get online, or like me and my friends having the best possible time. It's just escapism. I'm in the metaverse. I'm escaping from that responsibility. Escapism, I think, ultimately is like, I don't want to be responsible. I think that's the story of Jonah, is maybe the quickest way to summarize that narrative. You desire to escape responsibility, you're going to end up in a place worse than death, until you finally say the right prayer, which is, God, I repent, and I believe you. And now, good, you can go on about your responsibility. But now you're back in the real world.
As you were speaking, I realized.
I know that was a lot, right?
No, that was awesome.
It's hard to
tie
it all together.
Well, we're going to talk about idolatry more and more. So you're introducing the idea of the idolatrous nature of this.
Yeah, it's just got to be brought into the big tech conversation.
The interesting thing is, in that Genesis 1:26-28 mandate, the Imago Dei, created in the image of God. Of course, there has to be a realm, if we bear his image, that we are subduing the forces of chaos, that we're ordering creation, we're naming the animals. There is there's this narrative now that any power is bad power, and any authority is toxic at its root, and the patriarchy and the this and that and the other, that is warning against. It's almost like a new anarchism is being elevated where there are no rules, there should be no authority. Any authority should be resisted because it's inherently untrustworthy,
Yeah.
because it's going to be used in improper ways. And so we're
Funny how that's a feminist idea, isn't it? Like, what if a bunch of us guys got together and said, compassion is evil?
Right. Take the more feminine kind of qualities, mercy and compassion,
That
or
I'm
whatever.
uncomfortable with,
Right.
because it reveals a weakness of mine, and I just that's terrible.
Right.
We shouldn't see that in society.
Rather than, which is why God said it's going to take a man and a woman. It's going to take masculine and feminine to bear his image well,
holistically,
equally, to have authority within a merciful framework, dominion within a compassionate outcome. But that box sitting there with that artificial world is part of what we're meant to dominate. And we aren't dominating it.
Well, and the way to dominate it is like,
right.
Problem solved.
That's the most ultimate solution. That parents have to, that's why we want to have a conversation that's thoughtful enough to not make it just seem like a trite action. It's a significant action. It's to see that the world has changed so dramatically, so quickly. Like, I know in my own casual observation, there's all kinds of concern and studies that have not yet concluded the effect of these systems on the human brain. There's never been an entire generation raised with more artificial reality than concrete reality. With this sort of perpetual dopamine hit, we're literally cooking the brain through an overextension of dopamine's effect on our gray matter. And we don't know what that looks like. Well, we don't know what that's producing in the long run.
I think we do. I think it's hedonism.
Yeah.
And so we can look back at the hedonic cultures of antiquity that received their just desserts.
Yeah.
So I think but now it's all technologically facilitated. So it just has this like sparkle and sheen to it. That's like, how cool is this new thing?
Right.
But
the hedonism of yore was fairly isolated.
I wish I was a book.
Yeah.
The hedonism of yore.
The hedonist went to a brothel. The hedonist went to a bar. Now the digital world is making everything the hedonistic playland. It's
your right.
It's where you do business. It's where you do socializing. It's where you do battle. You enter that world, and it all becomes a hedonistic possibility in the pursuit of pleasure and meaning in life.
But you deserve it.
Right.
Like that's your right to earn enough money to be able to engage with that. And it's become so necessary to engage. Like, I mean, just an easy example is at one of my part-time jobs that we used to, like, if you had to request off a date, there was a book you would request that off in, and now we use an app that just has the scheduling and all of that. And so I had mentioned to my manager, I just want to make sure that I have like Labor Day weekend off for Gage's wedding. And he said, well, that's just all done in the app now. And I was like, well, but I think I had put it in the book already, but I'm looking in the app and it doesn't have that listed in the app. And he's like, well, we don't use the book anymore. If you want to request off, you do it in the app. And he wasn't saying it to be mean. He's just like, that's matter of fact,
that's just the way it is
now. But so I couldn't help but think, okay, so what if I didn't have a phone?
Right.
Like, are you saying that because you're assuming that I have one? Or what if I told you, well, I don't have a phone? That would probably bother you because we would have to have this like human on paper interaction that keeps us responding. It's like, it's just easier on the app. Just do it on the app. Like he's politely telling me, I don't want to think about it and we don't have to talk about it. Do it on the app. Problem solved.
Right.
It's easier. Just do this.
Right.
And that's where you get complicit, and that's where you become lazy, and that's where, as a society, like not him and not me, as a society, we all just agree, yeah, this is easier.
Right. For the sake of convenience, we erode our own humanity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's part of the challenge is inch by inch. We've traveled a mile on that road. now we can look back and see how far we've come, but inch by inch, we didn't notice.
Right. And so now for the sake of convenience, I don't want to go to the bathroom playing a video game. I rather just pee in my diaper.
Right.
So how do you convince that kid that, how does he open himself up to the spirit of adventure? And the thing is, if you're just thinking of this, like, how would I talk to this kid clinically as a psychologist, let's say, it's going to be like, what is just the next step that we can do? So maybe that is like, when you have to go, you can still wear your diaper, but when you have to go to the bathroom, let's go to the bathroom.
Right.
And then come back. And it's like you would just do these tiny little micro adjustments. But I think the power of a story is to offer you like what Morpheus offers.
An alternative.
Neo.
Otherwise, you're just taking things from him.
Right.
You've got to give a superior story.
Right. And then when you choose to engage with it, you wake up.
Right.
And you see, and like C.S. Lewis does it really well in Pilgrim's Regress. When
Yeah.
he finally dives, it took that whole journey just to get him to dive into the waters. And then he reemerges in the world, but he sees it for what it is.
Right.
And the whole point of that journey was just to get to that liminal moment of all of the voices surrounding the lake and just shouting accusations and
Right.
temptations and discordant narratives that he could otherwise tune into. But he finally developed the ability to tune that out,
Right.
so that in faith he could plunge into the depths of the waters that transform.
Yeah.
Now he emerges on the other side of that blessed chaos. Here's the real world that's, I'm stripped of my like the veneer of what was going on around me. I
Right.
can now perceive it for what it is. Like you
Right.
have that spiritual x-ray vision. I'm really seeing the real story. So I'm here in the world, but now things look different but real. And I learn to engage with that. But that's the power of a story. It can transform you from the inside. It can transform the micro narratives that your eyeballs perceive to be real narratives rather than what you have become artificially conditioned to see.
Yeah.
That's what I think happens when we're in the digital world and we learn to perceive the wrong types of narratives because we're always discriminating. So then we learn to aggregate unto ourselves the unhelpful narratives that further the unhelpful patterns, that further the addiction, that further whatever the problem is that I'm leaning into.
So to because I'm getting what you're saying, instead of this is a vessel with a fluid, this is water, and this is the.
What action are you going to do with it?
I thirst, and this is an answer.
Yeah, that's the answer to your thirst. So,
Right.
and
I'm not looking at this as a ceramic vessel that holds something independent of my need. It is, I need this, and therefore I thirst. And there's a holism to the approach because I'm a biological construct made in the image of God that sees a narrative.
Yeah. And maybe one example is like if this was on the ground, a dog might come up to it, sniff it, lick it. And it's not thinking, behold, this red apparatus containing that looks like a buoyant,
Right.
translucent. It's just like, I think I can drink that.
Right.
Engaging with the narrative structure of it. And Jonathan Pajot says this very elegantly, as he is wont to do. He talks about, because I think he actually uses the example of a cup as one of his. He uses an apple too, or a chair. And he's like, you actually perceive, it's more accurate to say that when you attend to it, you perceive the higher unity that unites all of its constituent elements.
Jonathan Pajot, an iconographer in the Orthodox Church.
Yes.
Yeah.
And John Vervaeke says this as well. Like he's just a bona fide scientist with a great mind on him, and in my humble opinion. And he says his point is, I don't have my phone on me, but because I'm a good person. But he pulls out his phone and is like, what is this? He's asking somebody, okay, well, you'd say it's a phone. He's like, that's not what it is. But more to his point, you have no way to comprehend what it is, because even if you took it all apart and took out all the chips and zoomed in with a microscope, you will never literally see everything that it is.
Right.
That's impossible.
Right.
So what you have to do is perceive the object of it that allows you to engage with it. Well, this is my phone.
Right.
So I know what I do with my phone.
Right.
And that way, that keeps you from just becoming terrified and awestruck by this magical thing that you can't perceive.
There's an
fully.
aggregate identity
Yes.
that serves our purpose.
The aggregate identity is the higher order unity that unifies all of the infinite myriad of constituent
So how does that
elements.
relate in terms of the idol sitting on the shelf that forms an aggregate identity
Mhm.
but it's not real. That's the problem is where the aggregate identity that everyone is pursuing is now artificial.
So I think where I could go with that is to say that the idol, we're perceiving it as its own narrative. So now what is the story behind the idol that unites the idol? How am I engaging with that?
Okay, and the
same way I engage with anything, a cup, a book.
But the significance of that is we have a baseline identity as the Imago Dei, made in the image of God. That's a fundamental. We are given that as a free gift. I'm born as a human being in the image of God.
Mhm.
But now how I craft and sculpt my potential is in the choices and the actions I make to fully actualize the outermost limits of what it means to be human, therefore what it means to be in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
So I start with something and I either become more of that or less of that.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore the choices I make, what I interact with, how I perceive my place in the world and engagement with others and the relative aggregate of those actions is making me something
Mm-hmm.
more or less than my raw material.
Yeah, like you have your own unity.
Right.
That you're in relationship with.
So if I am bowing down, serving an idol that is inferior, it has the gloss of something superior, but it is fundamentally inferior.
And you submit yourself to it.
And I submit myself to it. Now, what is that doing in terms of the diminishment of my Imago Dei?
Yeah, which it's subverting that under the authority of the image.
Because now that's the narrative I'm crafting for myself.
Yes, and that's how when you discriminate the role of the idol in your environment, you say that's above me.
Right. And
which is wrong, but that's what you do.
Right. And so because all of our lives are, we can look at our lives as a story with chapters, conflict, struggle, the hero's journey, the Jungian kind of archetypes of our existence. But within that narrative, then I'm choosing the characters, the substance, the themes, the outcomes, the purpose. And so if I am surrendering my narrative to an artificial construct, and that is consuming my days, my attention, my fascination, my energy, am I staying in the image of God, or am I remaking myself in that image?
Right.
I'm choosing a narrative that is beneath my status. What is that doing to my actual identity?
So along comes this modern technological idol, which accompanies the spirit of the age, or embodies it potentially, that tells a young person, you are who you are.
Right. Right.
What do you want to be?
Right. It's
That's
malleable.
You will become what you will become. You are who you are.
Which is true in part, because we can choose our narrative. Because
we're made in the image of God, who is what he is,
right,
and will become what he becomes. That's how he revealed himself to Moses.
Right.
So I have this idea of, like, it would be an artistic series of juxtaposing a biblical moment and a present day moment to just show to allow the reader to judge for themselves why those don't look the same but are doing the same thing. So you imagine Moses' attention being caught by the burning bush.
Right.
But he's at work and he's looking at that. And then I imagine a 40-year-old man, keys in hand, dressed for work in his uniform, about to head out the door, and he looks over at his video game console.
Right.
The TV. It's like his attention is being grabbed and he wants to he wants to see what it's about, but he doesn't know, but like because he knows what it could be. And so why would that be unhealthy in one circumstance but pious in another I mean pious,
Right.
to use a word.
Right.
Why
Yeah.
Moses did that, but it's because he's attending to something that he thinks is of such value that he needs to go and submit himself to it. There's a right way to do that.
Right.
But when you do that in the wrong direction, you're doing exactly what you said, which is idolatrous.
Right.
Which is why that's such a prominent motif all throughout the Bible, I think, is because that is almost opposite the faithful intention of God-fearing people.
Right.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Right.
When you correctly identify what is above you,
Yeah.
and you bow your head to that, now you can be wise.
Right.
But you're not going to be wise until you have begun to fear God.
But you're touching on something, because there's this principle of the possibility of transcendent fascination.
Absolutely.
And so what we allow ourselves to be fascinated by
Right.
is setting our soul on a course of conformity to the thing by which we are fascinated.
Right.
That is the narrative we're choosing
Right.
to shape our story.
Yep.
And so that Moses turning to the burning bush, the reason you say that was pious was because it truly was transcendent. It was an opportunity to encounter God, and the rest of Moses's life was conformed to that. Out of that came his call. Out of that came his adventure. Moses is known in history as he is a legendary figure, a true historical giant, because he turned in a moment of transcendent fascination and discovered the call on his life. And now he is the defining agent of Israel's history, and the lawgiver, and civilization.
He heeded the call.
All of that. Well, how many of, not only then am I looking to the glowing box to tell me something, and I'm you talk about getting low, we kind of position ourselves in this position before it. Tell me who I am.
Yeah, nobody's standing up, chest out, shoulders back, and like playing the Xbox.
Right. You're kind of in this contrite, submitted, interactive posture with the glowing box, where it tells a story that you want to be a part of.
Yes.
And now that story becomes more and more of what you want to be a part of. And how many other glowing fires are around us that we're dull to, because we've chosen our form of transcendence, but it is a transcendence of human invention. Therefore, it cannot be truly transcendent. We cannot transcend that which we ourselves have created for us. It is by definition of us.
Well, because I think in a way that's what it subverts our own authority, and it puts us down the hierarchy, so to speak, because a byproduct of ourself, which would in theory have to be greater than what we were capable of making, but now we're like, no, but this is actually greater than I. So we, like, wouldn't that be like God looking at us and being like, these are greater than I? It's like, obviously that would never happen. That's the point. It couldn't happen.
Right.
But we do that when we elevate above us the technology of our own invention.
No, I don't even know the terms, but you get to pick your warrior class, your armor, your whatever, and you say, that's greater than me.
Yeah.
That's who I want to be.
Yeah.
And I become the avatar as my aspiration.
Yes. You offload.
And it doesn't even exist. So now we have hollow-souled humans sitting in their diaper, striving to be a digital artifact.
Yeah, because I think that is the point. It doesn't exist. And in the mind of that person, maybe if they were questioned on it, they'd be like, what's the point of asking that question? Like, it's right here. I'm playing with it.
Right.
So it may as well be real, rather than thinking that what we believe in should be that which we don't see.
Yeah.
Instead, I would rather offload my creative capacity and my warrior masculine bravado and my social status. I want that to be aligned increasingly with the digital avatar that I so desire, which is elevating above me a completely ethereal, imaginative. That's all it is. Like, there's no word that concretizes it, because all I have to do is pull the plug. And it's gone.
Right.
The server gets wiped. It's gone. Oh, I got all this. I just got this reward. no monetary value.
So,
It's
so
just here.
comparing that, you could say, well, that's an imaginative leap, and imagination's good. That the muscle, I actually really believe that. But so by contrast, though, what we're talking about is once upon a time, a boy read a book about George Washington and wanted to be president.
Uh-huh.
A boy read a book about, I remember, it might be King Arthur. It might be a mythical figure. But by and large, the world was composed of biographies of heroic figures,
Uh-huh.
men and women, and you entered into the aspiration to be someone who had actually existed.
Yeah.
You were defined in your imagination structure. Your imagination was directed towards history,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't mean backward thinking. It's aspirational into the future to be someone again who actually was real.
Yeah.
And so that's the power of the narrative structure of Scripture. Is I can talk about, I want to be like David. I want to be like Moses. I want to be
Mm-hmm.
like Paul. I
Real
want to be
people.
like Daniel.
Real
They're
people.
real people with real struggles, real this, that, and the other, real failures, and real encounters with God.
Yes.
Those are transcendent aspirations
Yeah.
that are rooted in reality. Now my transcendent aspiration can be unplugged. It's a digital creation that is only as unique, not unique, only as its outer limits are still human because it's a human
Mm-hmm.
created construct.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how fantastical it is, it has no basis in reality once it's unplugged.
Right. But we still care about it. So, like, I still care about my status on the leaderboard.
Right.
I still want to have that social recognition because
So your
people
status on the leaderboard can be unplugged.
Yes.
Now who are you?
Yes, it's like the house built on the sand,
Right.
rather than rooted in the rock foundation. And I think even in mythology, you have like Greek mythology, for example, you've got heroes, even demigods, that are still doing their actions on Earth. And you have
Right.
places that recognize that because they're not doing like there's Valhalla, and there's these like these places that conceptualize realms that aren't exactly earthly, but the idea it still is connected to the narrative of what's going on Earth that dictates the ability to even enter into that land.
Yeah.
Whereas now we have this idea that's like I'm playing World of Warcraft, and so the heroes of World of Warcraft are doing something that's in this land that has names and has places and is huge, and it's so big I can't even comprehend it all. But there's nothing real about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing about it that is like tethered to reality. It's all fantasy.
Yeah.
So I engage with the adventure of those heroes and their storylines, which are all I keep saying deracinated because I just think that's the best word to describe how it's utterly unplugged, untethered, removed from the structure of reality.
Yeah, but you and I are both readers. I mean, I raised my kids to read. I made you read The Lord of the Rings. I wrote a series of fantasy books. I love C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. I have a high value for the power of imagination to shape destiny, to shape a sense of that. I heard a burning bush when I read The Lord of the Rings. I saw an invitation in that.
Yeah.
And I can't say that any part of that world is real, except that it was a real man telling a real story at an archetypal level that reflected. So I think we have to figure out how to delineate the value of the narrative imaginative structure of another world.
Yeah, so how about this? The Lord of the Rings is made in the spirit of the truth of telling a great story that like because the man himself was a God-fearing man.
How's that different than the, Halo and you go on the
Yeah, well, because they're telling hero stories.
Right.
So they're imitating the archetype, but they're not doing it from a place of the biblical heroism. They're doing it from a place of imaginative fantasy that isn't hoping that the reader gain. I guess the way that I would have to make this argument, and then it's up for debate, that the orientation of Tolkien wasn't book sales and finances. It was his own personal wrestling with heroic biblical stories and mythology for that matter. But still, the point is like the actions of people on earth that are either pleasing or displeasing to the highest authority.
Yeah.
And then in these other stories, ultimately it's sales driven. It's about ability to be advertised. So it's honoring money, and it's honoring it's honoring a sexual growth of the corporation, but it's not honoring the Bible, and it's
Yeah.
not attempting to tell the story of God in a novel way that might entice people into that story.
Yeah, I think
Does that make sense if I would delineate
it
that?
does. It does. And I
Like
mean,
one is Christian, we could say,
Right.
God fearing, and then one is sales driven. It's
Sure.
it's financial.
I think, the love of money is the root of all evil. So the profit driven nature of an enterprise can be inherently corrupting. But is it always inherently? Those are other conversations to
Yeah,
have.
but what if the narrative comes from that drive?
Right. I think the thing that
It's a good question though, because
yeah, I think there's something about, because the best selling video games are, in a sense,
they're telling a story.
they're telling a
telling a
story.
compelling story.
They're offering
a world.
their own mythology.
Yeah, absolutely.
An invitation of sorts to the adventure. To me, it's not the nature of the story, or even the profit driven nature of the story.
Mhm.
It's something about removing. I heard someone, maybe it was my college professor a long time ago, but each new technological advance has removed us in sequence increasingly from the muscle of imagination. So just give me a little minute here
Okay.
to try to.
Yeah, okay.
I,
Yeah, you got
Oh, yeah. prior to written history, there were oral societies. And so you would tell a story and repeat the story and
Mhm.
repeat the story so much that the hearers became the tellers for the next generation.
Mhm.
The brilliance of oral societies, they had highly developed memories to tell the story precisely, genealogies precisely defined. I am the son of the son of the son of
Right,
the
like
son
they
of the
probably
son
had
of.
higher working memories too, like
Ex-
higher IQ than
Exactly.
we do.
There were the mental acuity was so much stronger in certain areas that I pull out my calculator now to do seven
Yeah,
times
smarter
4.
than us because they were less dependent on technology.
Right. So not only in the just the raw materials of intelligence that were being demand was placed on them, and so the societies themselves were arguably more intelligent in terms of the use of certain functions of the brain to retain information and pass it on, because they didn't. Then writing becomes a more systematic way of doing that, but it's still demanding
Mm-hmm.
a lot. And so now I'm reading and writing, and that's demanding. Then along comes radio. And it's almost a return to oral, but it is no longer necessary for me to remember it because we have written records.
It'll be recorded.
Yeah. And so I can just listen in a kind of a passive way to an engaging story. I can get the news, but the news is disposable. I'm not trying to remember and transmit the news.
So you're not ever really fully attending to it.
Right. So that, I mean, even though when it first came out, you would have the family gather around it.
Okay.
But it's not like they're trying to then tell their kids 20 years later, there was this one episode and here's how it went. And they had to remember that.
Yeah, I think I get your point.
It's disposable. The oral history wasn't disposable. Now it's kind of a return to the oral experience, but it's all disposable. So it's in the cache and then cleared from the cache.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's TV. And now I don't even have to use my imagination to picture this, mystery episode of who that story that was told, or H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. And I'm imagining, the earth was in panic. That's legendary. H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, because people thought a real alien invasion was happening. because the experience was so realistic in their imagination.
Yeah.
Now TV, I don't even have to imagine it. Just give me make the set work and create the period
Mm-hmm.
piece, and I can enter into that,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm one step removed from imagination. And now
Uh-huh.
technology keeps that going and going to a point of such immersion that I think part of the danger, what I'm trying to get at, the difference between that and a fantasy world in a book is it's going back to what you were saying about the cup. I'm still an incarnational vessel for something
Mm-hmm.
that might be inviting me to participate in Frodo's heroic journey,
Mm-hmm.
to imagine myself within that space and part of the Lord's call coming through this imaginative process that then synchronizes with I open up this book and this becomes the even higher story for that story, but I'm incarnating the narrative of that for myself. I turn on that box and it's a story that I'm participating in, but I'm actually passive in any other reality
Mm-hmm.
outside of that reality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't turn that story off. I close the book and I'm still dreaming about being that person.
Uh-huh.
I unplug that and all I want to do is get back to that.
Yeah, and maybe part of that is because I don't have to use my imagination when I'm playing the game. I'm
Right.
so occupied.
It's so much more real than it's ever been.
Yeah, and the um along the lines that you just put, I think even Tolkien himself would express disapproval at somebody who became uh a zealot of his series that spent more time studying that than they would studying the Bible.
Sure.
I think he would hope that what he was doing was inspiring unto the greater story, the real story. And like I know Lewis would feel the same way. He wouldn't want
Right.
somebody poring over Narnia and getting every detail unless they just had the imaginative capacity to be rooted in reality. But that's like fun for them, is they get to be like, oh, what is this story doing?
Right.
And I honor all the time spent into it, that there is a lot of depth and nuance to get out of it. But I think Lewis and Tolkien are two examples of men that just had almost frightening capacities of imagination and abstract ability, and they've who like literally who knows how many books they've read.
Yeah.
Tolkien spoke a dozen languages,
Right.
including those of his own invention. So like that guy is capable of having all of his notes and creating this story in a total fantasy world, but he still himself was a God-fearing man. You know,
Right.
he was a believer. So that didn't, I don't know enough about him to say that that made him go crazy. I don't think he was like a lunatic writer. I think he was a Christian that then wrote a fantasy series. And I think that's different than people that don't have the imaginative capacity to engage with the story without becoming lost within the story.
Well, I think what you have
Is that in line with what you're saying, though?
I think so. I think you have in guys like Lewis and Tolkien people that had their own kind of obsession with a story that was thoroughly informed by the greatest story.
Uh-huh, yeah. Because
And
that was their story.
that's right.
They were
Lewis
part
was
of that.
overt in the metaphorical application. Tolkien was not a fan of that approach,
Right.
but unabashed in the fact that his worldview was telling us his Christian worldview was unavoidably spilling onto the pages.
Yeah.
And I think an argument could be made that Tolkien and Lewis have done more to start gospel conversations, if you will, conversations about a different kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
a different starter conversations, because millions and millions of people have been drawn into those stories that they are their own burning bush moments.
Mm-hmm.
They touch on transcendent possibilities, transcendent themes, transcendent the impossible world in peril, and a small group of friends that's committed to each other, and the danger, the original sin kind of danger that everyone thinks they can master, but it masters everyone except the one who is humble enough to never want it to begin with. And these kind of things become conversations that affect culture more than the dogmatism of a preacher who doesn't know how to relate to a person.
Right.
But I don't know. I think we're both kind of groping because there's 10 conversations we want to have. I think we probably ought to wrap
We're
this
having them
one
all
up
right now.
yeah, I think we probably ought to wrap this one up. But what's occurring to me is someone starting with us here in episode 1 may say, well, you all are just Luddites, right? So what's our answer to that?
Yeah.
Because I've got so much tech in this house. That's part of the problem. I'm starting to feel the need to disentangle myself from the artificiality that I myself, inch by inch, have allowed. I've come miles down a path into an artificiality and a dependence on artificiality. I fortunately am from a generation. My values and narrative were kind of set before technology was this pervasive. But I see in my kids, my grandkids, the threat of these things, and really, again, just as a concerned citizen and a Christian, the drift of the world, and I can't ignore that in my own life, or whether I'm connected to that box or not, I'm living a lie. I've got a phone, I've got a computer, we got the studio set up, I've got 3 TVs, I've got, all of this. And wherever I go, I take that phone with me. So how do I live authentically and create boundaries for this, but have a superior narrative that allows me to properly prioritize? Otherwise, I'm sitting in my own diaper and I'm unwilling to admit it. So I'm becoming a Luddite, maybe, but I'm not a Luddite.
I think it comes like that is an individual question. What is I don't think it would be correct to assume that every person has equal thresholds for their engagement with this stuff, and some people.
We've recently had a conversation with a man who's a good man, godly man that has had a high position in the tech sector, developing AI systems, and he's figuring his way out through this, and he's going to have a different responsibility in society, and need to do or not do than you or me.
Yeah, and he wasn't developing them per se, but like he was privy to that.
Right.
But I think the like some people have the ability to drink alcohol and they can have 3 drinks and they're still being a Christian person, let's say. They're not letting go of that fear of God and responsibility and social obligation. They're doing it socially.
Within a biblical framework, they feel the permission to have a glass of wine at a meal, and that's not threatening their sobriety or their values.
Right, because that's what I'm saying. Maybe they're having 2 or 3 glasses, but maybe somebody sitting next to them is having 2, and the other person's having 1. One of them is having none, but they're all doing that under their own conviction.
Right.
And I think what Paul was getting at when he's saying don't cause a brother to stumble is if you know that you're in the company of like-minded people that are all comfortable with their various levels of engagement,
right,
and that's not a challenge or a threat to their conviction.
And none of you are threatening your own sobriety with your decision.
Right, then you guys are celebrating in the Lord together. Right. But if you know that there's somebody among you who's like, I'm in AA right now, I had a hard time with this, I'm triggered easily, I'm uncomfortable, then none of you should be drinking. Right. And it doesn't matter what your capacity is, it's about honoring the least among you.
Right.
So, because I think that's the Christian principle, is the least among you is Christ, as far as you're concerned.
Right.
So as far as how we would, this is what I had jotted down about how would we be individually engaging with this in our own lives. And the pervasiveness of technology in our home, but then we're kind of looking at it, I'm like, well, I guess I do have a lot of TVs, like, and I do watch a lot of TV, but like maybe that's correlated. There's the psalm that says, I lift my eyes up, where does my help come from?
Right.
My help comes from the Lord. Well, in that context of the psalmist writing that in Jerusalem, up on the hills are the idols elevated to the false gods.
Right.
To Baal and to Asherah, like those poles and those stones were set there to be the objects of attention, and that's where then you would go to actually do those rituals.
Right.
But that was so when he lifts his eyes up and asks, "Where does my help come from?" It's like the rhetorical question to the idols: Does my help come from you? Does my help come from you? No, my help comes from the Lord.
Right.
The Lord is not on the high hill. The Lord is not the object that we have to look up at. It's like that. I think that was the that is a part of the importance of the Lord commanding Israel: do not associate me with the high places.
Right.
I am where I will be.
Right.
And so what are we putting in our high places? I think that is a cultural question to ask that would help reveal to us what are the idols that we erect around us that give us the sense of comfort, false comfort.
Okay, good. No, okay, keep
Well,
going. But I want you to answer how do we answer the Luddite question?
Oh, how do we answer the Luddite question?
I mean, keep going on your thought.
Well,
Finish
I
it.
guess I felt like I was answering it more. Maybe I'm beating around the bush, but
Yeah.
I felt like I was getting to the heart of it. Like, is the TV the highest painting in my home?
Right.
Is that the thing that I've elevated to the highest position physically? Because that's what I want to pay the most attention to.
Right.
Or,
yeah. But I would not say we're Luddites.
no, I wouldn't either.
But there is kind of a Luddite, a person fundamentally opposed to advancement. Is that the definition? I know the contextual usage of it.
Well, that's how I was taking it to mean.
Yeah.
Is like, you're like,
this isn't
categorical rejection of technology.
Yeah, this isn't just the old man yelling at the kids on his lawn,
like the Orthodox Amish, let's say.
Right.
That's
let's go back to how it used to be. I'm not actually trying to go back in time because we can only be who we are and create a future.
Yeah.
If we're cognizant of the present.
Yeah.
But I do think as we're racing down this cliff, I think of the Calvin and Hobbes, the famous Calvin and Hobbes. They're racing down the cliff, and Hobbes is like, are you sure about how fast we're going and where we're going? And Calvin's just flying headlong, and they crash into a tree in the pile of snow and kind of rattled. And Hobbes says this famous line. I hope I can get it right, but basically, be careful where you're going, or you'll get there. And I don't think any of us are asking, where are we going?
Yeah.
But we're sure to get there because we are going there one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a Luddite value system. It's a skeptical biblical appraisal of how fast things are changing. How far down the hill are we? What would it actually take to change directions or to secure our kids who are on the journey with us, whether they know it or not? We're the ones taking them down that hill. So we're carrying future generations to a destination where they may or may not actually have value anymore.
Yeah.
Have a future anymore.
Their value is only tethered to the construct.
Right. And that means that I would rather be accused of being a Luddite and have that conversation than not.
Yeah, and it is so if we're perceived as being so averse to like modern technology that we come across as the proverbial Luddite, then like, okay, that means I'm not being understood. But then it sounds like we don't have a lot to talk about.
Right.
Because that's what your perception of me is. But if my eyes are open and I'm accurately perceiving the narrative, and I'm like, there is unashamed selfish hedonism rampant in modern society, I don't want to participate in that system. I know where that road goes to.
Right.
I have the story that has told me where that's gone time and time again. No, it's not hedonism. You're just being honest about who you really are. No, it's not hedonism. It's just virtual reality. It's not hedonism. It's okay. You can call it whatever word you want. I know the spirit of the narrative that is leading to. That's what I'm allied with, is the spiritual reality that explains my reality, which I have to have faith in.
Yeah.
That's the point. So I wrote down the and Jordan Peterson was the first person I heard describe it this way. Whatever his thought process was to get him there, what I retained from it was the necessity of the particularization of the narrative. I know that's a mouthful, but the idea is for the story to be relevant to me, it's good to have the respect for tradition, but I also need to see what is its present embodiment. Like, how is it particularized right now for me? And that's the value of novel storytelling, which honors the story, like Tolkien, for example. But what he offered was to people of that time a story that they were capable of grasping because it was particularized in their social environment.
Right.
So that time was like, it was, that fantasy world was like, and we're still telling it to this day on Amazon Prime, but
Right.
like at that time, that was the novel particularization of the hero's journey
Right.
and his wrestling with faith.
Right.
So it was well received, but I think it was not dishonoring. It wasn't trying to elevate itself above a better story. It was trying to be like, here it is again for you folks that need the newness of it to accept it.
Right.
And I think there's something honorable and very transformative and like faithful about doing that from that spirit. But how ironic would it be for somebody to see the movie The Matrix and then be so just like fascinated with the product that they watch it like 100 times? And it's like geeks and they dress like it. And and it's like, yeah, but what's the point of The Matrix?
Right.
The point is unplug, disconnect, wake up.
Right.
That's the point. So, but now I become so fascinated by like, yeah, but look how cool it is.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, now you're missing the point.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the distinction can be made between people that are willing to appreciate the technology for what we can learn through it, but only as far as that is connecting us to objective reality. And then there's people that are just like, oh, here's my top 10 gadgets of 2023. And like, I'm a techie and I just like to be on the cutting edge of what's new because it's fun. And I've always got the newest phone. And it's like, okay, so is that really in service to the better version of yourself? Or is that maybe you being lost in the sauce?
Yeah. Yeah. So we want to have the point of these conversations is it's some self-reflection. It's some social criticism. It's groping towards biblical insight along the way, because the idea that tech itself is evil isn't what we're claiming. The idea,
not at all.
Yeah, but inch by inch, how have we redefined what normal is in a way that is now transparent to us, so we don't even know how artificial things are becoming, how aberrational from the narrative society has become. And if we're all hurtling down that cliff, multiple generations, it's not just the responsibility that my generation has to your generation and your brothers, Gen Z and Gen Alpha or whatever that's called, for where we're going and in a sense where we're taking us, but it's also those generations for whom this is normal, the quality of human being they are going to be by the time they inevitably have to adopt some level of responsibility for me in my old age. So I'm getting you there, and who you are going to be is going to reflect on how you take care of me when I need help.
That's right.
And that cycle is not healthy right now. We are not producing leaders attached to reality, future leaders attached to reality. We are producing future leaders with an artificial reality, an artificial value system, an artificial significance, an artificial Imago Dei.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that feels like that we're supposed to wrap up.
Yeah,
but
no, that is. I think it is. So we'll just keep going along that line.